Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Welcome, friends, to this second day of this Satipatthana, 4 establishments of mindfulness retreat. Bhante Ji expertly introduced you to these 4 Satipatthana, 4 establishments of mindfulness yesterday in his introduction speech. And so now, for the next 4 days, we go into more detail regarding each one. So today, I will be taking care of kaya, or body, and tomorrow I will be taking care of vedana, or feeling. And then after that, Bhante Silananda will be here, and he will be taking care of chitta, which is the mind, and the dhammas for the last 2. So I wanted to talk a little bit briefly about the word patthana, to add a little bit more to what Bhante Ji was talking about. So indeed, it does mean to set forth, to establish. One of the later meanings that I find meaningful is starting point. And this, to me, makes perfect sense, because when it comes to the part of the Buddha's gradual practice where we begin to examine and cleanse the mind, then these 4 establishments of mindfulness, this is the starting point. And today is body. This is the very, very, very beginning. So we can think about this as we go through our days, as we're practitioners. We can think about, where do we start out? We always want to start out going back to these 4 establishments of mindfulness, making it a habit. And when we do, when we build it and develop it as a habit, that's when it really becomes powerful. So that aside, we'll go into the first section, which is Kaye Kaya Nupassi Viharati. Now, this can be translated in a couple different ways, and depending on who you listen to, they might say dwelling, observing the body in the body, or the body of bodies, or even the body in and of itself. So this is one of those things where people will translate it different ways. But when we go through what the Buddha means by this, these 6 practical teachings, practical things that you can put into practice in your own life, then you can come to a better understanding of what it means to be dwelling, observing body in the body. So that word anupassana means to looking at, consideration, viewing. And Bhante Ji mentioned it a little bit briefly yesterday, that it also has another connotation of realization. And that's more than just a viewing or an understanding. That's realizing the deeper truth. And so when we practice the Satipatthana, that is what we're working on. That is what we're doing. Right? Normally, we just go throughout our day on autopilot, and things happen, thoughts arise, emotions arise, and you don't know where they came from or how they came. You don't know how to work with them, how to manage them. It's like you're just stuck on a roller coaster or on a train on a runaway tracks. That is because we go through our life unexamined. Socrates has a wonderful quote. It says, "An unexamined life is not worth living." Buddha said something very similar. Buddha said that heedfulness is the path to the deathless. Heedlessness is the path to death. Those who are heedful never die. Those who are heedless are as if dead already. The Buddha is exhorting us, encouraging us not to be zombies, not to be dead already, right? Not to be sheeple, to really examine what this psychophysical organism is, this mind and body. And so the mind is a very, very deep and hard to see, very subtle thing to see. This is good where we start with something that's a little bit more gross. And I mean it in the, I mean it versus subtle, not the other way. And that's the body. So the body is something that we are intimately connected to and we intimately feel and understand. No matter what level. So most of us, if you're on autopilot, you understand it at a little bit of a level. And when you start to examine it, when you start to set forth and make it an establishment, then you really begin to understand what this body is, how this body works. And the Buddha gives these 6 methods of practice to just for that, to understand what this body is, where it comes from and where it's going to go and all of that kind of stuff. So if you go to Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation, or if you go online and you look up this sutta, which is Majjhima Nikaya number 10, under Baya, under Kaya, I put together the Pali and the English word. That was interesting. Under body, contemplating of body in body, the very first thing in the Pali translation is actually anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing. However, there's been some interesting scholarship in the last decade or so, particularly by a venerable Bhante Analayo, if you know who that is. He has 2 wonderful books on Satipatthana, amazing books. And there's a field of study now that studies the early Buddhist texts. And these are the 4 Nikayas. You might not know it, but these 4 Nikayas exist in all the traditions of Buddhism. In Mahayana and Tibetan Vajrayana, they call it the Agamas. And so the part of the scholarship today is actually to understand you can have the same sutta in the Pali, the same sutta thousands of miles away in Sanskrit from China, the same sutta from Tibet, and you can examine the similarities. The amazing thing is it all came from an oral tradition first. It was orally transmitted over thousands of miles, and then it was written down later. And what they're finding is examining the suttas, something like the Satipatthana Sutta, 95% of it is exactly the same, even after hundreds of years of oral tradition and such like this. But there are some differences. And in the Pali, in this section in body, is the only of the 3 that has mindfulness of breathing first. The others have the second section first, which is the 4 postures. And so Bhante Analayo, and I agree with him with my very much little less authority of the suttas, Bhante Analayo puts forth that actually the beginning point is developing a mindfulness of the posture you're in. And I agree because I've seen that in my own practice, and I think it makes sense in relation to the Buddha's gradual practice. So the very first step, think of, all of you, you've been to retreats before. You've been, you have done meditation for some time. If you want to practice mindfulness, the very first step is what? Understanding, developing a very basic understanding of what is going on in the body, and that is understanding the postures. So the Buddha says in this section, that when one is walking, they know that they are walking. When one is standing, they know that they're standing. When one is sitting, they know that they're sitting. When one is lying down, they know that they're lying down. So this is before any other kind of fancy, deep understandings. You're starting from the very beginning of developing the basic awareness of a simple thing. What your body is doing right now. What is the posture that the body is in? Just being aware that I'm sitting. And then when you do that, right, stuff comes from that. I'm sitting, then you can move into, oh, I'm going to talk about this tomorrow. All of a sudden now I start to feel things. I'm reminding myself I'm sitting. Now I feel the cushion under my butt, and I feel my legs, and I feel all these things. Right? That initial step put my awareness on a certain thing that opened up an awareness of many other things. And that's really how it happens with this practice. With walking meditation, if you don't do walking meditation, it's one of the postures. Extremely important to do walking meditation. It's very important. I don't have time to go into detail about walking meditation too much, but again, as you're walking, at first you're just feeling the feeling of your foot touching the ground. But as you're paying attention to that, as you're reminding yourself that you're walking, then you start to feel, you start to notice the various things like the tendons in your calf moving and all of these intricate details. Just from first placing your awareness, establishing your awareness in that basic posture of the body. So this is something that anybody can start with from the very beginning. As you're going through your day, at work, at home, driving, whatever you're doing, at first, you might remind yourself, you might remember once or twice a day, if that, maybe once or twice a week, remind yourself, oh, okay, well, what am I doing right now? But then as you build that up, it's like an invitation for you to understand deeper. Right? You're training your mind to understand what is going on. Okay, I'm sitting in the car. Boom, that's the feeling. Now what's going on? Now feeling comes. And then mind and all the other things we're going to talk about later. It's hard to talk about one thing because they are all very interconnected in that regard. But so starting out, establishing just a very basic, simple object is very important because, like I said, it builds the habit. One of the I'll skip that. I was going somewhere and then it'll probably come back in 2 seconds once I move to something else. But that's a topic for the mind, right? Okay, so the second section is sampajanya, which is clear awareness. That's a term many of you might be more familiar with. And so the sampajanya can mean discriminating, like understanding one thing from another, comprehending one thing from another. And if we started out with just a very basic mindfulness, a basic awareness of this is what I'm doing when I'm walking. See, now I remember exactly what I was going to say before. When I was taught walking meditation, one of the first things I was taught was when you first start and you're setting yourself up before you walk, you just remind yourself, here now I am standing. It's a very good thing to do. Here now I am sitting. So as you're going through the day, develop that sati. Because we know sati as most people use it as translated as mindfulness. And that's one of the parts of sati. But there's also recollection. You can't be mindful if you're not reminded, if you're not remembering, if you haven't built up the habit to be mindful. So that is, the more you do it, the more it becomes a habit, the more sati you have. So in every situation, you don't even have to be thinking about it. You could have meditated 3 days ago, and you're in a situation, and then sati comes in, and then you're clearly aware of what's going on, and then the power of that allows you to make better decisions in the moment of whatever the situation you're in, because you're mindful and aware. And that always allows you to be more skillful in your actions. All right, so going back to clear awareness. So what does the Buddha, when he talks about clear awareness, what is he talking about? What does he say for us to do? What he says is, somebody is clearly aware when they are walking, going back and forth. It means walking meditation. When they are standing, sitting, lying down. So we've already covered that, right? We know that from the last one. Then going to sleep, waking up, speaking, doing regular activities, eating, swallowing, all of these things. So we've switched from a basic awareness of what our body is positioned in to moving towards activity. Now it's not just, this is the position, now it's what's going on right now. What is our body doing? And that's not all he says. He continues with, he even includes going to the bathroom. You have to be aware, be sampajanya, clear awareness of what you are doing. So next time you go to the bathroom, don't bring your cell phone in. Be very aware of what's going on. Because actually this connects with what we're going to be talking about in relation to examining the body in about 10 or 15 minutes. So don't at least while you're here, I would highly suggest doing so when you go home as well, but at least while you're here, make a concerted effort to, like I was saying at the mindfulness of eating thing yesterday, carry the ember, keep it going as much as you can. Nobody's going to be 100% mindful unless you're an arahant, unless you're an awakened being. Believe me, nobody can be 100% mindful. It's a lot of effort and a lot of training and a lot of practice. We can try to will ourselves to be mindful, but our will lasts very, very, very short amount of time. We all know that from trying to make New Year's resolutions. The will is so, but what we can do is set the groundwork for this. And we set the groundwork by these simple things. First, by examining, reminding ourselves what our posture is in, and then trying to be aware of everything that we're doing. When we're at work, if it's something physical, you can examine what you're doing that's physical, how your body is moving, what's going on, all of these things. And then, of course, as I was saying before, it's not just the body, because there's the mind involved in feeling and all these other things that get connected. Once you really start examining, you start to see how this all interplays together. And then that's when you really start to develop some amazing insight into what this mind and body is about. And so now that we have covered being aware of our body position and our body during its activity, now we move on to another kind of body, the mindfulness of breathing. Bhante Ji mentioned this yesterday, that the Buddha does indeed say that the breath is a kind of body. And of course, the breath is part of the body. The breath is what keeps us alive. You know, the breath is also a neutral object, or an object that is neither painful nor pleasant, at least while we're not paying attention to it, which is what we tend to do to neutral objects. So this is why the breath is extremely important, and why the breath is exhorted by the Buddha. Mindfulness of breathing is what he teaches. Mindfulness of breathing. There's other things mentioned in the suttas, but he is always talking, 99 times out of 100, he's always talking about mindfulness of breath. He tells us that mindfulness of breath, anapanasati, can bring us directly to awakening. And when we think of, oftentimes when we think of mindfulness of breath, we think of it as, if you're familiar with that, we think of it as a samatha practice, as opposed to a vipassana practice. Right? We think of it as just a tranquility practice. And it can be that, but according to the Buddhist teachings, in these early Buddhist texts, in these Nikayas, you can see how mindfulness of breathing can bring you to insight, to awakening. And indeed, you know, today there's, actually, I guess since the 70s or so, there's this mindset, you know, this understanding that vipassana is something, some kind of a technique, or something that you do. Vipassana simply means to see through, or to see deeply. And Bhante Ji, I think, mentioned it yesterday. No matter what you're doing, if you're seeing three things, if you're seeing the three characteristics of existence, everything is impermanent, all things are unsatisfactory, all things are not self. When you see those three things, you're seeing with vipassana. You're seeing deeply, because you're seeing the characteristics of existence. And so the mindfulness of breathing is a vehicle to insight, in that following the breath brings us to deeper states of concentration, tranquility, well, first tranquility, joy, then concentration. And it's in these deep states of concentration, indeed the jhanas, that you can focus your mind with such sharp and clear power of concentration that you can see the most subtle levels of this reality of the three characteristics of impermanence, anicca, dukkha, and anatta. And so it's I don't think it's a surprise that this would be part of this four establishments of mindfulness. Because indeed, if you read the Anapanasati Sutta, which is Majjhima Nikaya number 118, you can see how Satipatthana and Anapanasati are intimately connected. You can see how the Buddha says that for the subduing of the hindrances are things that keep us from our deep concentration. From the subduing of the hindrances, you practice Satipatthana. You practice the four foundations of mindfulness. And this is also seen in the Noble Eightfold Path, where number 7 in the Noble Eightfold Path is Satipatthana. It's right mindfulness. Right mindfulness. The four foundations of mindfulness. And this moves on to the number 8 in the Noble Eightfold Path, which is right concentration, which is jhana. So we practice this whole system of Satipatthana to bring us to this calm, peace, tranquility, to allow us to see deeply. And so this is why Anapanasati is in this section because it is part of the body. It is something to examine. It is a body in and of itself. And indeed, in this section, the Buddha, there's 16 steps to Anapanasati, but I'm only going to go over 4 because there's only 4 in the Satipatthana Sutta. First one is understanding breathing in long, breathing in short, examining the whole body, and tranquilizing the bodily formations. And the Buddha says these first 4 steps, when you are practicing that part of mindfulness of breathing, examining that your breath is coming in long, short, etc. When you're practicing these, he says you are doing kaya nupasi viharati. You are dwelling, contemplating, examining the body in the body. So that is actually the 16. There's 4 4s in 16, right? And so each 4, the next 4 are connected to feeling. The next 4 connected to mind. The next 4 connected to dhammas. So I'm not going to go into that. You can look at that. If you read those 2 suttas, you can see the connection. Okay, so now we've worked on, examining our postures, our activities in the body, spending time with our breath. The next in these 6 is what's called Patikula Manasikara. And this is often translated as reflection on the repulsive. This is examining the body, the parts of the body. And so when people think about examining the parts of the body, that is what they think, because that's the translation used so much. That they think that what we're supposed to do is develop this aversion and this hatred of the body. Oh, this disgusting thing and all these things. But there's another way you can translate this Patikula Manasikara, and that is reflection or observing the opposite. And that makes sense to me because what the Buddha says is that we have an intoxication with youth, an intoxication with health, an intoxication with life. We have an intoxication with this body. I like this body. I'm strong or I'm beautiful or whatever. I can do all kinds of things. It doesn't matter. Whatever you attach to in the body that you like. I like my hair, I like this, I like that, all these things. And so we have this real enchantment. Or if you look at whoever's person you're attracted to, and then you start to see all the various parts of them that, that check off with things that you like. Oh, I like this, oh, the hair and this and all these kind of things, right? So we are normally enthralled with these bodies. We're normally enchanted by them. The Buddha talks about that he broke his enchantment. He became disenchanted with health and disenchanted with the body. And that doesn't mean he hated the body, although he did some really rough things to his body for 6 years. When he was doing that was before he was enlightened. So another way to translate this practice is asubha. Subha means beautiful. So asubha means not beautiful. Again, this is pointing towards breaking this enchantment. It's not pointing towards hating the body and being averse to it. There's a story in the suttas. Actually, it's in the Vinaya, the monks' rules. And in this story, the Buddha talks about practicing mindfulness of death and following, examining the 32 parts of the body. And he does the teaching, and he goes into a seclusion, and he comes out like 3-4 weeks later, and I don't know, maybe there was like 300 monks when he went in. And he comes out and there's like 100 monks. And he comes out and he goes to Ananda and he says, where did everybody go? And it turns out, while he was in his seclusion, they practiced this 32 parts of the body, and they became so disgusted with their body, they started killing themselves. And then they asked other people to kill themselves. So it's just a funny story. Like Buddha comes out and says, how come there used to be so many people, now there's not? What happened? And so, you know what the Buddha said after that? When he realized, these people, he said, practice anapanasati. Then he goes into mindfulness of breath. So, what I'm telling you all these things to point you at, the point of this practice is not to develop aversion. Think of it as a scale. You have attachment on one end and aversion on the other. We're all the way over here. We want to move to equanimity. We don't want to go this way. If we've gone this way, we've gone too far. Then you have to go back this way. And so what we do is the Buddha says to examine the body from the tips of the toes to the scalp, or the scalp to the tips of the toes, and examine it as containing various parts. On the outside, you have head hair, body hair, nails, teeth, and skin. If you've ever seen an ordination, that's the first thing that the senior monastic gives to the newly ordained monastic, to examine these 5 things. And so that's what we see on the outside. Man, I'm going to put some nice cream on the skin, and it's all nice and smooth, and my nails are nice and this, and all these things, and my hair. Well, but then inside, then he moves inside. Bones and muscles and skeleton, bones, muscles, sinews, heart, liver, all the various things that are composed. If you ever watched like an autopsy on TV or in real life, or you've seen anything, you can see what it looks like inside the body. We have a wonderful medical book. Actually, it's literally for medical school, and you can just see like the body literally like carved in half this way, carved in half that way. It's amazing stuff. And so he's telling you that you examine that this body has all these things, and that not only the stuff like liver and heart and stuff, he also says blood and mucus and urine and saliva, etc. And so he gives a simile as to what that means. And he says, just as if a person had a bag, and this bag was filled with various beans and rice. And in the bag, he opened the bag and they took out, oh, this is hill rice, this is black beans, this is red beans, etc. It's not, this is hill rice, oh, I hate hill rice. Oh, this is red beans, oh, I like real beans. It's not like what like and dislike. It's just simply, just like somebody who would literally just identify that this is this rice or this is this bean, this is what you're doing with the body. To really examine and make sure that you understand what this body is. And when you do that, this is one of the things I practice every day in front of Jack, for those of you who are on the tour and got introduced to Jack. Practicing this every day, examining this, and this naturally leads you to mindfulness of this body, and that it's not permanent, and that one day you are going to be gone, which is coming up soon in the talk, not maybe. Maybe, it possibly, there could be a meteor that could come down and kill us, or a plane, who knows. We don't know how much time we have. But that's what doing this is doing. This is allowing us to have a more equanimous understanding of what the body is. Not to be enraptured and enchanted by it. Because what happens when we're enraptured and enchanted by something? Right? We're attached to it. And when we attach to something, we don't want it to change. We want it to stay the way it is. But everything, all conditioned existence is sankharas. all is anicca. Everything is impermanent. Everything is unstable. So if you attach to your wonderful body and then you grow old, then I have a very good friend who 2 years ago, she was diagnosed with ALS. Now she can't get out of bed. That's a degenerative disease where you can't do, and she's only, I'm going to be 40, she's 43. Right? That you don't know, but when you examine your body and you realize that, yeah, this body is impermanent and it's fallible and you can't really depend on it, well then, that doesn't mean that you hate it. It just means, well, when something does happen and you have an equanimous view of it, well, crap, this is what I get for having a body. Well, maybe I should work hard to not be reborn again. Yeah. Well, there's a great story from one of my favorite monks, Keshri Dhammananda, who's actually a contemporary of Bhante Ji. They were in Malaysia together for 10 years, a long time ago, like 40 years ago, 50 years ago. And the story goes that when he was at his doctor's, and the doctor told him he had cancer, and he laughed. And they said the doctor said that's the only time I've ever told a patient that they had cancer, and they laughed. And that's simply because, well, that's the nature of the body. That's just the way it is. So it's examining the body, understanding the body, not being in la-la land and unexamined, oh, this body's great, I'm going to be young, and I'm going to be healthy forever, and all these kind of things. Because you've seen, I'm sure you've all seen, I've seen it in my own life, when somebody, it's like they're going 1,000,000 miles a second, and they're just, totally oblivious to their body, and then they just hit a wall, old age, sickness, death, and they fall apart. It's because they weren't able to train themselves. Again, you can think of this, oh, this is something only monks should do. But no, I disagree. I did this practice for years as a layperson, and it allowed me to help me understand that, yeah, this body is just, I can't depend on it. I mean, it's like, right now, it's like I have to use one of these because my lower body is basically rejecting its host the last 2-3 months. All kinds of pains and issues and everything, and I'm like, yeah, well, I don't know what to do about it, but so that's why, that's the reason why. Actually, that's one of the major reasons why examining the body in general, the whole Kaya Nupassana, but it's important for that one as well. So the next one, and again, this is all various ways of examining the body. The next is the 4 elements, dhatu. And this is something in Buddhism that we often think of. When we think of the 4 elements, earth, wind, water, and fire, we think of like Celtic, or like things like everything is made of earth, wind, water, and fire, and these kind of things. And that's not really what the Buddha is pointing at to here. Actually, if you read the suttas and you understand, the Buddha very rarely, if ever, talks about what the external world is made of. He's talking about what you're experiencing and what you can see in your own experience of the mind and the body and the phenomena. And so this technique of examining the elements is another aspect of that. So what do we mean by the earth element? Earth element is solidity. You can see all of these 4 in here. You can see solidity, right? You can feel your bones. You can feel the fleshy, solid parts of the body. That's solidity. Then water, liquidity. We have all kinds of stuff. I can feel the saliva in my mouth. All the different things. 75% water our bodies are, something to that effect. Plenty of earth, plenty of water in our body. We also have plenty of winds in our body. Winds that go all throughout the body. these days I've heard of figurative winds and literal winds. So like winds, I don't necessarily understand that, and it's not necessarily Buddhist, so I can't say much about it. But you can think of all the winds, gas. Think of it as in terms of gaseousness in the body. And then, of course, when we talk about fire, this is best to be understood as temperature. We have temperature in this body. You know, if we didn't, we would be dead. As a matter of fact, that's what the Buddha talks about when he talks about how a being dies. The temperature, the fire element leaves the body and these kind of things. So when you examine that, this is another way of breaking the enchantment of your body. Another way of understanding the different characteristics of your body. Examining these characteristics: solidity, liquidity, temperature, and movement or wind in your body. And so we come to the last one, my absolute favorite one, the one that nobody wants to bother practicing. And this is called the 9 charnel ground contemplations. This is pure meditation on death. And so at the time of the Buddha, there were these things called charnel grounds. I'm sure in some places there's charnel grounds today. But at this time, they don't know if it was a cultural thing or if it was unclaimed bodies or whatever. But there was just a place a couple miles outside of a city where people would bring their bodies. And they would leave the bodies there to rot. And so the Buddha said to his monks and nuns, he said, go to these places. Sit there. Observe the bodies. Watch the bodies. See the different levels. See the different ways that the body decomposes. And so he says, it's interesting because he does say, when he talks about this, he says, it is as if. So he's teaching it to us as a mental exercise too, because not everybody could be in a charnel ground. Even at the time of the Buddha, there were city monks and forest monks and monks in different places in different ways. But he wanted us to examine the first step is a body 3 days dead, bloated. Right? If you've ever seen a body, if you've ever been able to have that wonderful experience of being around people, after they've died, and seeing bodies and stuff like that, to really see, whoa, okay, this is what I'm going to be. This is what this body is going to be. And as a matter of fact, the Buddha says for you to remind yourself, to recollect, okay, just as this body, so too one day I will be as well. And today the internet's great, right? So you can go online and you can, type body farm. If you ever don't know what a body farm is are places where they just have acres and acres of bodies decomposing. And this was started in the 70s, I think, by a detective. And it's helped like all kinds of stuff with, finding criminal cases and all this kind of stuff. But it's literally, so you can go online, you can see videos. You can see any kind of a stage of how the body is decomposed. We also we break it out for the mindfulness of death retreats that we have here, but in the library there's a folder, and it has, I believe it's from Thailand, it has pictures of a body was left out, and you see monks by the body, and it just has pictures of the various stages of decay. It's just like, it looks like a normal person, and then it's bloated, and then like the skin starts going like this, like because all the meat and all the water starts to seep out and all these things. Are you disgusted yet? No. Again, this is not meant to be a thing that makes you disgusted. This is meant for you to see things as they really are, to break the enchantment that we have with the body. this feeling that we are going to live forever, right? This feeling that this is mine and I'm going to do whatever I want with it and this is it. But when we understand this, and so then after the bloated body, then it's to as if a body is being eaten by animals. The Tibetans do it really cool. They have a sky burial practice where literally if you want to, you can just have your body left out in the mountains and you can, the animals. So you're giving your body to the animals basically and to decay and to rot. And so then after that, after the animals, then it's, by this point, the liquid starts coming out and all these things. I'm waiting for somebody to like get out and run away. But this is, you can read this. Maybe I'm explaining a little bit too much. The Buddha doesn't go into that much detail, but he does go into pretty good detail. And so then the next step would be just bones with skin on them and blood. And then bones just with blood in the joints. And then, bones where the joints start to break apart. And then bones that begin to be scattered. And then bones that begin to bleach. And then eventually bones that turn to dust. You heard that, I think it's a Christian thing, right? From dust to dust. The Buddhists is the same thing, right? We're dust. Eventually our bones will just be dust. When I do this mentally, when I practice this and think of my body doing this, I often like to think of it, the bones being covered by sand. Because what you're doing is then this goes into a little bit deeper than the body, but for me it's reminding myself that one day I'm going to be gone. Nobody's going to remember me. It's going to be as if I didn't exist. And that's something really scary to think about at first. But then it starts to be really peaceful. It's like, yeah, that's kind of nice. I kind of wish nobody knew I existed right now. Yeah, it's like you're like, oh, I have all these things I have to do and all these kind of things, all of that. So, again, this is what this practice is pointing you towards. This is why I give all of these examples, is because I want to encourage you to practice these, not to just think, well, I'm young or I'm not a monk. These things are for monks who want to become awakened and all these kind of things. And, yes, it's for monks and nuns who want to become awakened, but it's also for anybody. It's important to remember, especially in the sutras, when somebody goes to the Buddha and says, how many disciples do you have? How many people who have reached a level of awakening? And he says, I have not only 100, 200, 300, but 500, but more men, women, monks, nuns, who have attained various levels of awakening. So you don't even have to be, you can be almost an arahant and still be a layperson. So don't sell yourself short. Practice. And wherever you go is where you go. And doing this practice will bring you to an equanimity, bring you to an understanding of what this body is. This is examining the body in the body, or the body in and of itself. This is understanding that the body is impermanent, that the body is unsatisfactory, that the body is not yours. There's nothing in the body, and you're looking at the 32. Is this liver mine? Is this spleen mine? Is this hair mine? I like my hair now, but then it falls into the soup and it's like, oh God, all these things. And when you do that, then you can be at peace with the changes of the body. You can be at peace with the things that occur with the body. And in closing out, I wanted to, Bhante Ji spoke briefly about the refrain. At the end of every refrain, at the end of every section of, in the Satipatthana Sutta, there's a refrain. And it begins with this. The Buddha wants us to examine whatever we are to examine. So all of the 6 things: postures, activities, mindfulness of breath, the elements, the 32 parts of the body, the 9 charnel grounds. He wants us to examine that both internally and externally. The Pali words are ajata and bahidda, which simply means of the self and not of the self. Again, this is another one of those things that's translated in different ways, and people argue over, well, it means this, it means that. But it's generally accepted that one of the major ways this can mean is that you're examining, hey, I have this body, right? Yeah, I'm fallible, I'm frail, I'm going to die. But man, I hate that person over there. God, they're so... oh, crap, they also have a body, and they're fallible and frail, and they're going to die too. Right? There's examining outside of you. Anything that has a body, all animals, anything, all of this, you can see and understand that any living being that has this body, the body is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self. And so then, besides internal and external, Bhante mentioned this again yesterday. See, he took a lot of my material, but it's okay. So the origin and the passing away. So the Buddha says that you can observe things arise, they persist for a time with alteration, and then they pass. You can think about it yourself, right? At one point, I wasn't always like this. At one point, I was like this. Now I'm like this. Then again, pretty soon I'm going to be like this. And then I'm going to be gone. You can see how your body is always changing. Always. And you can see how the origin, you can see how it changes, and then you can see how things in the body pass away, and eventually that your body will pass away. And then the Buddha says, if you can't examine the internal and external, if you can't examine the origin, the arising and passing away, then at least maintain the basic sati, the basic awareness, the basic mindfulness that there is a body. So this is the refrain. This is the thing at the end of feelings, at the end of mind, at the end of dhammas, all of these things. These are the things that the Buddha is wanting us to examine, both internal and external, arising, passing away. Basic mindfulness of this. Okay, so that will end it for body. But as I've said before, all of these 4 satipatthana, I've heard people or teachers say, like, you teach, well, today I'm gonna concentrate just on feeling, or just on body, or just on mind. And I guess that's a valid way of practice, but for me it's always been it's so easy, I guess. Maybe that's not the right word. How shall I say it? It's just worked better for me to understand that, like, it's so interconnected that whatever's happening in your body, it's affecting your mind, or your mind is affecting your body. Like, this is dependent origination, right? This is how everything is causes and conditions. It's all connected together. Mind, body, your feelings, mind, body, and the dhammas, phenomena, mental objects, these things. So keep that in mind as we go along in the next days, and tomorrow I'll talk to you guys about Vedana Anupassana, which is contemplating feeling and feeling.